Zohran Mamdani visits Donald Trump in the White House after a tumultuous week in heavily Arab Dearborn, Michigan. Meanwhile, new Somali fraud in the Minnesota community. What is an American after all? All these questions very much bubbling to the surface. We're going to unpack that and much more on today's episode of The Josh Hammer Show. Well, the headlines out of Dearborn, Michigan just continue to accumulate. In recent months, we have seen the mayor of Dearborn, a Lebanese Arab man by the name of Abdullah Hamoud, who at one point told a Christian minister that he did not belong, that he was not welcome in Dearborn, Michigan. Why, you might ask? Well, because the Christian minister had the temerity, had the chutzpah, to object to renaming a local street sign in Dearborn, Michigan, after a journalist who had boisterously praised both Hamas and Hezbollah. So they were renaming a street sign in one of the most infamously heavily Arab towns in all of America. They were renaming a street sign over a Hezbollah quote-unquote martyr, to use the jihadist lingo. Christian minister objects. The Lebanese Arab mayor of Dearborn says, "You're an Islamophobe, you're not welcome here." Okay, that was a few months ago. So just this week, we had yet another fracas in Dearborn, Michigan. There was a provocateur, and admittedly, it's a provocateur. I'm not going to necessarily defend this individual, but there was a provocateur who went there and attempted to burn a Quran. And this is obviously an inherently provocative thing to do when there are all sorts of counter-protesters there. But the counter-protests in Dearborn, Michigan this week got a little out of hand, you might say. Let's go ahead and watch this clip of the Allahu Akbar shouting in Dearborn, Michigan this week.
This is not America. This is an insurgency. They are taking over our country. They're taking over our country. They want us all dead.
Allahu Akbar. Yes, that is what the jihadists yell before they are about to kill you. Among perhaps other times, but that is certainly the most notable instance that that particular phrase is invoked. It actually wasn't just Allahu Akbar, though. There were also Death to America chants. Watch this.
Al-Maut America! Al-Maut America! Al-Maut America!
All right, so that was at a recent unrelated event in Dearborn, but you get the idea, okay? The mayor is telling the minister that he's an Islamophobe because he objects to renaming the street sign after the Hezbollah quote-unquote martyr. You have the Allahu Akbar chants. You have the Death to America chants. Not good. Not good, folks. Given the fact that this town, Dearborn, Michigan, is majority Arab, this is not exactly surprising, and they're probably going to come back at some future point. By the way, Rashida Tlaib, she of the squad claim, she of the infamous assertion many years ago that she said thinking about the Holocaust gives her a warm feeling, a warm, tingly, sensational feeling. Ooh, I can't imagine why that would be Rashida Tlaib. Here was Rashida Tlaib. She was actually asked about whether or not she would condemn these chants of Allahu Akbar and Death to America, and on Fox News, she did not necessarily condemn them, did she?
Tlaib?
Fox News. I don't talk to Fox News.
At a rally in your district, people were chanting Death to America. Do you condemn?
Talk to Fox News.
But do you condemn chants of Death to America?
I don't talk to people that use racist tropes.
Why can't you just say whether or not you condemn people chanting Death to America? Why are you afraid to talk to Fox?
Fox News is not listen, using racist tropes towards my community is what Fox News is about, and I don't talk to Fox News.
Is Death to America racist?
Fox News.
Is chanting Death to America racist?
I'm talking about your guys' racist tropes. You know, you guys know exactly what you do. And I know you're Islamophobic, but you guys got to go deal with it on your own self. You're not going to use me.
Oh, yes. It is apparently Islamophobic, according to Rashida Tlaib, to condemn chants of Death to America. Apparently that makes you an Islamophobe the same way that the Christian minister in Dearborn learned that making him an Islamophobe is simply objecting to renaming a local street sign after a Hezbollah quote-unquote martyr. That is quite a definition of Islamophobe. If these folks are trying to make hundreds of millions of Islamophobes in the United States today, I cannot possibly think of a more effective tactic than that. This was not the only instance, even this week, though, of militant Islamic uprising in these United States. A horrific display at the Parky Synagogue in New York City earlier this week. One of the most well-known synagogues in all of New York City. New York City, of course, home to the largest Jewish population outside the state of Israel of any metropolitan area in the world. There were a lot of protesters, and the media curiously refers to them as anti-Israel protesters, but they were at a synagogue. They weren't at the Israeli consulate. They weren't at any kind of Zionist organization. They were at a synagogue. And they were saying all the stuff that you would expect them to say. Let's watch that clip. So they're talking here about globalize the Intifada. If you can't hear the audio, that's what they're saying. They're saying globalize the Intifada. Intifada revolution is the only solution. All these other gobbledygook at best, at worst, genocidal incitement, sloganeering. That is what these folks are doing. That is not anti-Zionism, folks. That is anti-Semitism. That is anti-Americanism. That is anti-Westernism. And that is coming to a city near you. As fate would have it, the incoming mayor of the Big Apple, Zohran Mamdani, was about to be the mayor of all those constituents, those lovely people that you just saw there in that video. He is at the White House today to meet with President Donald Trump. The Trump administration correctly referring to Mamdani as the communist incoming mayor of New York City, but that communist mayor has made the trip to Washington to talk about, well, it's not entirely clear exactly what they're going to talk about. But all of this stuff really does seem to be coming to the surface, does it not? The Dearborn fracas this week, Allahu Akbar on the streets. Zohran Mamdani, the Ugandan-born Zohran Mamdani, who seems to harbor a dripping disdain, not merely for Jews, which he obviously does, but also just for the United States, the country that took him in and naturalized him as a citizen just about 7 years ago, give or take. Meanwhile, as if that wasn't enough, our buddy Chris Rufo, one of the most formidable investigative journalists in all of America, has a must-read new report out at City Journal this past week. The largest funder of Al-Shabaab is the Minnesota taxpayer. Al-Shabaab, in case you are not aware, they were an Al-Qaeda offshoot. They are now an independent radical Islamic organization. I guess there was some tension between these warring Sunni fanatical Islamist clans. So Al-Shabaab is a radical Islamic jihadist organization in Somalia. They have committed unspeakable acts of atrocities. They have committed horrific acts of piracy around the Horn of Africa. They are on the eastern side of the continent. They are really, 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 really bad actors. And they are distinctly Somali. And apparently, according to Chris Rufo and Ryan Thorpe's reporting over at City Journal, and this has been verified now by other sources as well, the Minnesota taxpayer has been put on the hook for this through various instances of money laundering. Now, this is not the only outrageous instance of Minnesota taxpayer dollars going to waste, and indeed of the Somali community, let's call it, in Minnesota engaging in outrageous acts of fraud. There are at least 3 criminal taxpayer fraud schemes just in the Somali community, depending on how you add it up, totaling somewhere between $300 to $600+ million in Minnesota state government and or federal government fraud. Somalis there in Minneapolis have at times stolen funds meant to feed hungry children. This is part of the COVID era disbursements and the emergency funds that came out during COVID around that time. They have stolen funds to help homeless people with disabilities and even to help kids with autism. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota has also uncovered a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme targeting the state of Minnesota's Medicaid Housing Stabilization Services Program. In addition to what I mentioned is this federally funded autism services for children program. In addition to the fact that Al-Shabaab, like literally Al-Shabaab, indistinguishable from Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Al-Shabaab has been put on the Minnesota taxpayers tab through various levels of fraud. Millions of dollars in stolen funds that have been sent back to Somalia, where they land in the hands of, you guessed it, al-Shabaab. I wonder who the congressman is from this particular part of the Minneapolis, Minnesota area, and whether or not that particular congressman may or may not be interested in stopping it. Oh, wait! That congressman is not Rashid Tlaib. It's the other crazy radical Islam sympathizer, Ilhan Omar. Oh, if only we had a clip of Ilhan Omar talking about how she is America first and how she is interested in stopping fraud and stopping taxpayer money and dollars flowing to the coffers of al-freaking-Shabaab. Oh, wait. Oh, yeah, we have a clip literally doing the exact opposite. Go ahead and watch this doozy.
waa kalsoonidaas inaan isku qabno annaga Soomaali haddii aan nahay wadankan annaga ku nool wadankan wadankii aan annaga tax ka dhiibno waaye waa wadankii gabar idinka dhalatayne ee Congress ka fadhiso intii aniga aan Congress joogo wadanka Soomaaliya biyaheeda dad kaleeta iyo badeeda dad kale ma qaadanayaan wadanka Mareykankana kuma taageerayo dad kaleeta in annaga ayna dhacaan marka taas ka seexda reer Minnesota gabadhii Congress u dirsateen way idinka war haysaa sidaad idinka u dareemaysiin dantaas ay u dareemeen.
So she's literally saying that she is here inside the United States to use her power, to leverage her position of authority as an elected representative of the people of Minneapolis, Minnesota in the United States Congress. And that she is going to do that on behalf of Somalia, on behalf of the country whence she fled. That is the congressman. Does that sound particularly America first to you? No, it's literally Somalia first. By the way, where are all the people up in arms about that? All the folks on social media who are talking about the AIPAC lobby and all this stuff there. Are you interested in this? And a congressman literally just saying the quiet part out loud that she is there to advocate on behalf of Somalia. And oh, by the way, the taxpayer dollars, the Somalis there are defrauding Minnesota taxpayers to such an extent that the single largest funder, I just can't get over this, the single largest funder of al-Shabaab is the Minnesota taxpayer. The Medicaid fraud, the autism fraud. There was astounding fraud in the Minnesota Somali community. My buddy and colleague at the Article 3 Project, Will Chamberlain, had a pointed tweet where he was quoting someone on this and said, you know what, maybe we should engage in some sort of program where we actually just pay them to repatriate, to go back home. There are some European countries that are doing that right now, actually. Sweden has a program when it comes to trying to repatriate all of the migrants that Angela Merkel and the European Universalists took in over the course of the Syrian migrant crisis. They're trying to pay migrants to go back home to Syria, Afghanistan, wherever whence they came. Maybe, just maybe, we ought to do so when it comes to the Somalis here in the United States. All of this, though, raises, literally all of this, Mamdani, Dearborn, the Somali crap in Minneapolis. There's a lot going on right now. All this raises the question as to what is an American in the first place. Have we so forgotten the lessons of September 11, 2001? Have we so forgotten all the horrific sacrifices that America's brave men and women made over the course of our various wars on terror? That we have just forgotten all of this when it comes to the fundamentally incompatible nature of those who are chanting Allahu Akbar, of those who are renaming street signs after Hezbollah, of those who are defrauding U.S. taxpayers who send money to al-Shabaab? Have we forgotten the fundamental incompatibility of all this with Americanism, with the American way of life, with our culture, with our inheritance, with our customs? Yes, with our religious values, all of it. Have we forgotten that? I saw a fascinating tweet the other day from Joel Berry of the Babylon Bee, a U.S. Armed Forces veteran. Here's what he wrote. Quote, me and thousands of other young men stepped up to fight radical Islam in the Middle East on the claim that you fight them over there so we don't have to fight them over here. Joel Berry continues, and while we fought overseas, while my brothers bled and died for that claim, our government was importing radical Muslims to Michigan, Texas, Missouri, thousands of radical mosques going up around the country, all preaching death to the country we love and fought for, the country my brothers died for, the country their wives gave up their husbands for. And now we have to fight them over here too. I don't think people realize how betrayed we feel, how enraged we are. Stirring stuff. Look, I'm not a veteran myself, but I can only imagine. If you served in Al-Anbar province, if you served in Fallujah, if you saw your best friends get blown up from a Qasem Soleimani planted roadside IED in the streets of hellish war-torn Iraq, if you saw unspeakable atrocities committed by the Taliban at the height of the war in Afghanistan, and now you're looking at this crap in America's streets, waving the flags of U.S.-recognized foreign terrorist organizations, whether it's the campus of Princeton University or Harvard University or Dearborn or Minneapolis, wherever the case may be. Look, there is a righteous conversation that's been happening really over the entire course of the first year of the Trump administration when it comes to legal immigration, when it comes to grounds for deportation. What are the actual grounds for deportation? Well, if you want to know the black letter law, if you are here and you are not a citizen, and you are a legal alien, the government can essentially deport you at any time for any reason, period, full stop, end of story. As long as they fulfill habeas corpus, you have a right to be presented with this, and yes, you can get some stupid ACLU pro bono immigration lawyer, but your sorry butt will be shown the door, God willing, ASAP. I think the more provocative question, the one that I'm going to raise, and one that I think that you should be asking is this. For the folks that we are seeing in these clips, the Allahu Akbar chanting Islamists in Dearborn, the Hamas and Hezbollah fans in Minneapolis, and so forth, what if they're U.S. citizens? Should we be engaged in a conversation, I think we should be, about possibly denaturalizing them? 8 U.S. Code Section 1451 is actually the relevant statute. We do have a statute on the books. We have a literal statute on the books that speaks of this. It is possible to denaturalize in this country. Is a little bit of a slippery slope? Maybe. Can it be done justly and prudently in situations like this? Oh, I think so. I think you betcha. I would love to see Stephen Miller, Tom Homan, Kristi Noem, and other folks start to open this conversation. There is a cancer that has taken roots here in the United States. There was one poll that came out just a few weeks after October 7, 2023, the Hamas pogrom that changed the Western world. This poll was taken a couple weeks later, in October 2023. Less than 3 weeks after this Nazi-style pogrom in southern Israel, this poll found that the percentage of American Muslims who believe that the Hamas atrocities of October 7th were at least somewhat justified, the percentage of American Muslims who said that, 57.5% said this was somewhat justified. Folks, my late friend Charlie Kirk, towards the end of his tragically truncated life, was very fond of asking this provocative question. What is an American? That's the title also of my syndicated column out on Friday. You can find that at Newsweek, LA Times, Real Clear Politics, various Salem Media Group properties, and elsewhere. Well, an American is not just the technical, legalistic conception of acquiring citizenship, whether via birthright or via naturalization. A citizen is also subscribing to the American way of life and to American values, subscribing to the Protestant work ethic and the various other norms in the public square that has been part of the majority culture ever since this country was founded. That's not happening in Dearborn right now. That's not happening in the Somali community in Minnesota. And indeed, all legal options should be on the table when it comes to trying to rectify this, because a free people and a free nation, we let this fester very much at our own grave peril. And all these events really do bring this to the forefront. Well, a few days ago was also an anniversary that you probably missed. I'll be honest with you, I actually missed it at first blush as well. But it's a very interesting, and in some ways connected to what we were just talking about, a very interesting anniversary that is worth discussing. This past Thursday, November 20th, was the 80th anniversary of the beginning of the Nuremberg Trials, which began on November 20th, 1945. The Nuremberg Trials, which you may or may not recall, were the proceedings, the legal proceedings, that brought the Nazis, the literal, actual German Nazis, to justice for the first time. And it's worth pondering some of the elements of this for a few reasons. I want to get into the legal side of this in just a moment here, but for now, let's just ponder the historical gravity of this, the 80th anniversary of this. Once upon a time, America spoke with all Americans, for that matter, other than maybe a Charles Lindbergh or so forth. All Americans spoke with such clarity on this topic that there was really not much of a doubt as to whether or not the United States was going to attempt to bring the Nazi war criminals to justice. It was only how exactly they were going to do so. Robert Jackson, who became a very notable justice on the United States Supreme Court, he was the chief prosecutor. And when he started, Robert Jackson, when he began the Nuremberg Trials in 1945, he said this, quote, "The wrongs which we seek to condemn and punish have been so calculated, so malignant, and so devastating that civilization cannot tolerate their being ignored." This was the origins of what today we might refer to as international law in a modern context. You can quibble with that and say that actually international law goes back centuries earlier to various Dutch legal theorists such as Grotius. Okay, we're not going to nerd out right now. That's technically correct. But the conception of modern international law, to an extent, does kind of get its teeth here with Robert Jackson's prosecution of the Nazi war criminals at Nuremberg. America had just won a brutal war along with our allies, the British, the French, indeed the Soviets, and various others. We just won a crushing military victory. Well over 400,000 Americans laying down their lives and paying the ultimate price in defense of Judeo-Christian civilization, defense of freedom against tyranny. Not every war has this stark black and white moral dichotomy. Some wars indeed do have something of a gray area. I've said since the get-go that the Russia-Ukraine war is slightly grayer than many folks make it out to be. Although these days Russia is more in the wrong, it is at least grayer than many folks make it out to be. But contra Tucker Carlson and various other propagandists, World War II does remain to this day the clear historical example, the quintessential conflict where there is a good side and there is a bad side. And Americans were able to recognize that. That's why they signed up in very large numbers. They left their wives and children home to do such extraordinary and heroic things as to storm the beaches of Normandy on June 6, 1944. Because Americans were able to see Nazism, literal Nazis, as an existential threat, as the embodiment of evil. To paraphrase something that Senator Ted Cruz himself said recently in talking about Hitler, may his name be erased. We're missing some of that today, aren't we? On our conversation on Thursday with Brandon Tatum, we got into this. There are a number of folks who are missing the forest for the trees, who are unable to see clearly that which Americans 8 decades ago saw so clearly. That Nazism is the embodiment of evil, and we should seek to eradicate it by force if it ever comes, God forbid, into power again, which it's not going to do. It's a dead ideology, but at a bare minimum, those who espouse it ought to be unequivocally condemned, shunned by all the various institutions and levers of society. That also increasingly seems to not be happening today. But there's something also very interesting about Nuremberg that I want to talk on as well. It's not just the historical analogy. It's not just how relevant it is to our current moment, which, as I just explained, I think it actually very is. One of my side gigs is that I'm a lawyer. I'm senior counsel for the Article 3 project, and to a lesser extent these days, but for a while, for most of the past 6 years, I would speak pretty frequently at law schools, typically for Federal Society chapters, and I've published a few pieces of legal scholarship myself. And one of the points that I like to make is that the Nuremberg Trials are the finest example, at least over the past century, you might argue in all of modern human history, they are the finest example of the limits of positive law and the need for something higher than that. You can call it natural law. You can just call it scripture. You can call it God, frankly, if you want to. Let me elaborate on that. Legal positivism is the notion that because there is a legislature or a king or a Führer, a president, whoever, because there are words on a piece of paper that, based on the country's own internal procedures, those words claim to be law and to have the force of law. Legal positivism would say that is the law, and the law must be obeyed. Now, there's all sorts of possible hypotheticals you might ask here. Well, what if you are to kind of go back to something that we also discussed earlier this week on the show? The Democrats put out this outrageous video. Alyssa Slotkin, all these lunatics put out this crazy video, essentially attempting to incite an insurrection in the U.S. military. That's literally what they did, saying you do not have to follow an order if it's illegal, but really the chain of command actually does matter there. So the remedy in that situation is to resign. That's the remedy, not to start an insurrection. But ultimately, the reason why a resignation in that context makes sense is because all this is being promulgated, all of this law, these procedures, these orders are taking place in the overarching context of a fundamentally just society. That is the United States. The United States is a fundamentally just political regime. It was founded on sound principles of political theory and sound principles of human anthropology, and really, to an extent, teleology. The American founders understood where they were at their moment in history. They understood their mission as being the beacon of trying to preserve that which today we call Western civilization, the biblical inheritance, and all that entails. How do I know that? Because they literally said it. Because they literally said what they were about in this particular country. We, of course, have the famous words of the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They are established by the Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We also have the preamble to the Constitution, something that I've been pushing more in recent years. I think the preamble actually is under-discussed. Well, the preamble says, quote, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain, establish this Constitution for the United States of America." Folks, if I were personally asked to advise on crafting a constitution in the year 2025, I would probably say that the principles on which your constitution or your constitutional order ought to be based will look a lot like that. Would look a lot like more perfect union, the establishment of justice, domestic tranquility, common defense, general welfare, securing the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, the notion of our posterity, getting into this notion of this intergenerational chain of transmission that is the core of the conservative disposition in life. So America is a just regime, fundamentally, and that is why such things as simply resigning when you don't like the command of your superior, that is the right remedy. But what about where the regime is not just? What about when the regime is founded on fundamentally flawed or perhaps outright evil ends? I'm thinking here about the Soviet Union under Lenin and Stalin. I'm thinking certainly about the Third Reich, the Nazi regime in Germany as well. In a situation like this, where you have words on a paper that purport to be law, they are written by the German quote-unquote legislature, aka Hitler's foot stamp, or they're just submitted in some sort of diktat or executive order, if you want to call it, from the Führer himself. That is perhaps under Nazi Germany's own internal legal procedures. Perhaps that is the quote-unquote law. But that's not just. That is not law in the true higher sense of what it means to be law. When I talk to law students, I like to ask them the following question. I say, have you seen the grainy old black and white footage of the Nuremberg Trials, of Robert Jackson, the heroic chief prosecutor and future Supreme Court justice? Did you see Robert Jackson and the various others ask, perhaps via translator into German, perhaps not, they asked many of these high-profile Nazi war criminals. They said, what do you have to say for yourself? Like, how do you go to sleep at night? I mean, like, you did horrific, unspeakable things. And to a T, they all had the exact same answer. They said, I was just following orders. And therein lies the crux of the point. Because when you're just following orders in the context of an evil regime, as opposed to a just regime, when you are just following orders in an evil regime, that's not going to cut it. That is not what a God-fearing person does. And that is why there is a need for some sort of higher and ultimate justice. So the Nuremberg Trials really stand for the proposition, one, that Nazis are evil, which you hopefully know, and that they should be unequivocally condemned, prosecuted, God forbid, at a regime level, eradicated, at an individual commentator level, shunned, ostracized, etc. But what it also stands for is another proposition, one that you perhaps have not thought about before, which is that legal positivism, this notion that because there are words on a paper that is the law, period, full stop, end of story, that only goes so far. This was the error of folks like a man who was otherwise a very great conservative, Antonin Scalia. They asked him once about what role the Declaration of Independence plays in constitutional interpretation. He said it has no role. It's not part of the Constitution. But it kind of is, isn't it? Because we know from Alexander Hamilton, writing in Federalist Number 31, one of those great essays written on behalf of the ratification of the Constitution, we know from Hamilton, who famously says, he begins this essay by saying that it is axiomatic, it's self-evident, that there are always certain anchoring truths or first principles upon which all secondary and tertiary levels of logic and reasoning depend. The question is, what are those principles? What are those truths? In America, we know what they are because they're in the Declaration and they're in the preamble. The Nazis and the communists had their version of that as well. The difference is that ours is good, theirs is evil. So when you're just following orders on behalf of an evil ideology, on behalf of an evil regime, there is going to be, or there's going to have to be, some sort of justice that comes your way. There, by definition, is some sort of higher law. There is such thing as the law of God. We can quibble as to what exactly we call that. In my own legal scholarship, I personally say that this is basically just Scripture, that this is the Bible itself. Some folks like to call this natural law. Fine, I don't necessarily wholly object to that. I think that can go a little off the rails depending on exactly how you formulate it. Neither here nor there for today's purposes. But whatever you want to call it, whether you just want to equate it with the Bible, as I more or less do, or you want to call it natural law theory, the law of God, what the Declaration of Independence refers to as the law of nature and nature's God, whatever you want to call it, it's there. And it will have its final say. The Nazi war criminals learned that certainly at Nuremberg. And all those today who are engaged in horrific actions on behalf of horrific regimes across the world, maybe you won't have a Nuremberg Trials situation, but at a bare minimum, you are going to get your just comeuppance one way or the other, whether it is in this particular world or the next world. And now it's time for our Week in Review Hammer Time segment, where we go through our woke headlines of the week. So Gavin Newsom is now saying that anti-woke sentiment is anti-black. Period, full stop, end of story. In fact, here actually is Gavin Newsom explaining how all this is really just racism. Go ahead and watch this.
I mean, they're rewriting history, censoring historical facts. It's a unbelievable moment. All this anti-woke stuff is just anti-black. Period, full stop. All the CRT, ESG, DEI stuff, that's all this is. It's this great purge, and it's happening in real time. And I'm sitting here, and I feel like, luckily I'm governor, but like we're not doing enough. Right. We're not calling this out. We're not drawing a line here. And again, it's not about Democrats or Republicans. It's about who we've
right and wrong.
Okay, so first of all, before getting into the details here, what is Gavin Newsom doing? Like literally, what is his end goal, and how does he plan on getting to that end goal? So earlier this year, you want to go back. We mentioned Charlie Kirk earlier in the show. You want to go way back to February, March, April. I can't remember exactly when it was. Newsom and Charlie had a conversation. I think it was on Newsom's show. And at the time, Newsom was kind of sort of pivoting. He was talking about how, actually, you know what, maybe biological males don't belong in women's sports. Maybe they shouldn't compete against the girls. And he seemed to be kind of sort of moderating. He was trying to read the tea leaves in the then near aftermath of the Kamala Harris slacking last November to Donald Trump. And now he's going back this direction. So I don't actually understand exactly what Gavin Newsom is thinking. He's not going to out Zohran Mamdani. He's not going to out AOC. He's not going to out Jasmine Crockett. It seems to me that as a white dude who could easily pass off as a superhero movie villain in a Hollywood studio, it seems to me that Gavin Newsom would probably be better off by trying to tack to the center and continue that line if he wants to be president, which he clearly does. He's not really made much of an attempt to hide that particular ambition. So I don't actually understand what he is doing here, just on a pure political calculation level. On the actual merits here, on the actual substance of what he is saying, about how anti-woke is anti-black, I mean, literally, no one thinks that. I mean, when I say woke, when you say woke, are black people the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, or seventh thing that you think of? No. That's not what I think of. I think of the radical rainbow jihad, of the LGBT agenda, of transgenderism, of the biological males, the women's sports. What else do I think about here? I think about support for Islamism, October 7th, and unfurling the flags of Hamas and Hezbollah. I think of the radical open borders agenda and this notion that you can't deport anyone at any time for any reason. I definitely don't think about black people. That's really not what I think about at all. I mean, Black Lives Matter was a radical Marxist organization. We might call them a woke organization. But no, I mean, this is kind of crazy taking on its face. I barely understand exactly what he is saying there. Maybe Dems are trying to make something of a pivot back to the Black Lives Matter day, but they're going to try and bring it all back to race there. But no, I mean, when I say woke, when you say woke, this is just garbage. He frankly has no idea what the heck he is talking about. Meanwhile, the State Department is proposing cutting research ties with dozens of universities over their DEI hiring practices. So 38 universities, according to reporting over at Fox News, could be suspended from a federal research program starting in January 2026. So the State Department is, again, proposing to suspend 38 universities, including some of the most well-known ones in the country, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, all of this from a federal research collaboration because of they're just stuck in their ways when it comes to DEI. So this memo came out earlier this week. It was first reported by The Guardian, the very left-wing British newspaper. And the State Department is apparently reviewing schools that, quote, openly engage in DEI hiring practices or maintain DEI-related goals for candidates at the ranks of the tenured professor level. Again, very quote-unquote prestigious universities, Stanford, Yale, Harvard, Johns Hopkins, Duke University, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How hard is it? Like literally, how hard is it to not discriminate on the basis of race? I mean, this is the irony, that Gavin Newsom is saying that if you're anti-woke, then you hate black people. No, I'm anti-woke because I don't hate anyone. I am anti-woke because I don't see color. Because I actually agree with what Martin Luther King Jr. said back in the 1960s, that you ought to judge someone not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. How hard to understand is that? I don't see race. Gavin Newsom sees race. Jasmine Crockett, all she freaking sees is race. Sonia Sotomayor and that other dimwit Ketanji Brown Jackson, all they see is race. Just like John C. Calhoun before them. How hard is it, you top-ranking universities, to not discriminate on the basis of race when it comes to your admissions program, when it comes to your hiring for administrators, when it comes to your hiring for faculty members? Just don't do it. White person, black person, Hispanic person, Asian person, who's most qualified? Boom, that person gets the job. I just fail to see how hard this is. It only makes sense when you realize that they don't give a crap as to what is hard. They don't give a crap as to what is empirically the quote-unquote right thing to do. They have a dogma. They have an ideology, and they will follow that ideology. They will follow that dogma from soup to nuts, from hell to high water, no matter what it takes. That's what's going to guide them. And in classic Saul Alinsky fashion, the quintessential Alinskyite line, folks, the ends always justify the means. But for all these universities that refuse to stop this garbage, to stop this DEI, which really is just racism, contra Gavin Newsom, for every university, yeah, they should be cut out. Good freaking riddance. As a reminder, if you're not already subscribing to the show, please subscribe on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Josh Hammer Show is available on video and on audio as well. But for now, have a great weekend, folks. We'll see you on Monday.